Hello, friends. Well, today I think I'm going to read something a little different, get away from Ernest Sato for a while. Um, Today is the 79th anniversary of the dropping of the atomic bomb on Nagasaki, and we had the 79th anniversary of the dropping of the first bomb on Hiroshima 3 days ago, August the 6th. Today is August the 9th. So really, in Japan, this is a fairly well, sad or serious time. Um, and the war ended, according to the Japanese, on August the 15th, which is one of the days of Obon, the festival of the dead souls, or the souls, Buddhist festival. So that's the kind of time of year this is. Although, of course, the Russians continued the war a little bit longer to get some territory, but that's another story. Okay, so uh, today, what I want to do is to read from a book written by my grandfather uh, quite a long time ago, starting in 1945. And it's about the death of his son Ian in battle in Germany. Um, I was named after his son, Ian. I have the same name. And so it's all quite personal to me. And I transcribed my grandfather's handwritten uh, story, and so that's what I'm going to share with you today. It's already published, by the way, and available on Amazon and Lulu.com. Okay, so I'm going to share it now. Here we are. In memory of Lieutenant Ian Lester MacDonald of the Black Watch, 1923 to 1945, remembered with love and pride. That is what is written on his headstone in the cemetery in Germany. Written by his father, Alexander MacDonald, CBE, commander of the British Empire, edited by his nephew, Ian Ruxton. Copyright me, all rights reserved. First published by me as a hardcover through Lulu.com in 2017. Whoops, I've just jumped a little there. That's my email, and these are the ISBNs for the Amazon versions, and there's a Kindle book also. This is my uncle, taken in 1944. His mother, my grandmother, organized a photo session. There we are. Oh, sorry, what does it say there? Let's actually try and read what it says. Lieutenant Ian Lester MacDonald in Black Watch uniform, late 1944. The photography session was arranged by his mother. Remembered with love and pride is the inscription on his headstone in the CWGC Cemetery, that's Commonwealth War Graves Commission Cemetery at Rheinberg, Nordrhein-Westfalen in Germany. It was chosen by his parents. And I think that's a close-up, is it, of the... Whoops, sorry. Yeah, I think that's a close-up. And it's actually in color. You can see that because, well, his cheeks are pink, and then the red hackle, which is the Black Watch, one of the Black Watch regimental symbols. Whoops, it keeps jumping. It's a pity. Okay. Oh, Flower of Scotland. Well, Flower of Scotland, of course, as a means quite a lot to me, as you could imagine, with all this in the background. Okay, so here he is in Royal Artillery uniform. He did well with the gunners, but was later transferred into the infantry, the Black Watch Regiment. This was him as an officer cadet training unit cadet, OCTU, and he passed out as first cadet. This is taken in school uniform. It maybe doesn't look like school uniform, but it is, of Loreto School, Scotland's oldest boarding school, founded in 1827. He was known as Chile MacDonald for reasons we will go into shortly. This is Aberdeen University Chapel with the wood panel. He did actually enter the university, but of course wasn't able to graduate. a bit like his father, who entered Glasgow University, but then had to go and fight in World War One. So here's Aberdeen University's Roll of Honour, his entry there. His name is also recorded at the Scottish National War Memorial in Edinburgh Castle and can be found in the memorial's website. I shan't read all of that. It's a little faint there anyway. There's plenty of other examples. So this is the author, Alexander MacDonald, CBE, was born in Glasgow on the 26th of September, 1894. I have given a separate YouTube lecture, which you can find on my channel if you're interested. After war service, he qualified as an accountant with the Glasgow Institute of Accountants and Actuaries in 1919. He designed various golf courses, including Santo Domingo and Pucón in Chile and Los Incas in Lima, Peru. His portrait is at Santo Domingo Golf Club. He died on the 25th of July, 1954. His brief obituary is in the Glasgow Herald, 28th of July, 1954, page 1. Yeah, I think he helped with the design of Pucón rather than designing it all himself. This is my grandmother, Dorothy Lester Susan MacDonald. She liked to be called Susan. I don't quite know why, but she had the MBE. She was born Dorothy Lester Northcroft in 1921. Sorry, she wasn't born in 1921. This is her photograph in 1921. Beg your pardon. She was born in the Bahamas on 18th of July, 1896. She died on the 12th of June, 1974 in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire at the age of 77. And my cat is here listening to every word I'm saying. Alex MacDonald and his daughter Margaret, 19th of April, 1932 to 8th of June, 2022, who married Alan Day Ruxton, 30th of October, 1925 to 19th of January, 2017 in Santiago, Chile, on the 16th of July, 1954, shortly before her father's death. Alan and Margaret Ruxton had 4 children, of whom the editor of this volume, that's me, born on 16th of November 1956, is the eldest. My father was the eldest of 4 brothers who also attended Loreto School. It seems an interesting coincidence. My uncle Ian, my mother's brother, and my 3 other uncles and my father all went to Loreto School. Okay, so this is a postcard. This is, I think, the only handwriting that has survived of Ian as a boy. And it's a postcard about a fishing trip in March 1936 to Lake Villarrica, 780 kilometers south of Santiago, from Ian to his younger sister Margaret. Well, I'm hoping to go there quite soon in September this year. I'm taking my first ever trip to Chile. And I was born in Peru, but I haven't been back there since I was born, so I'm doing both of those very soon. So this is what the postcard says. Dear Margaret, I am sending you a postcard view of the river we fish in, the Tolton, Lake Villarrica, and the volcano. Yesterday we went down the river, but did not have any luck until the last hour. We arrived at a lovely spot, but only with 2 fish, half a kilo each. There we caught as many as we lost. I managed to get a 3/4 kilo fish on my rod. It was lovely the way he made his first run. By the speed the reel turned, I imagined he was a good 3-pound fish. We finished up with 5 fish, having put back 5. So catch and release. We each caught 5 fish. Mine was the biggest. As I lost a big one, Daddy let me play. How are you? How is Mummy? Give my saludos, greetings to everyone. Much love, Ian. And then I have a footnote here because my grandfather wrote a book about trout fishing in Chile, in Chilean rivers, as the title is. And in chapter 13, Alexander MacDonald comments as follows on his son's fishing. Some 15 years ago, my son, Ian, and I spent a very profitable holiday at Villarrica, and I had the pleasure of seeing him bring in his first good-sized fish. By this time, the rod mentioned in the previous chapter had been pensioned off, and he was the proud possessor of a Hardy, no capital letter, please. There is a maker of rods called Hardy with a capital H, an English maker. If still somewhat primitive weapon with about 40 yards of line on the reel. As far as he was concerned, there was no better rod on the river, and that was all that really mattered. Early on in our trolling expedition, he got a fine 5-pound brown trout, which took him 20 minutes to land. And just at dusk, when I was getting worried about keeping our taxi waiting, he upset the apple cart completely by getting into a 3-pound rainbow trout, which put up a splendid show and took him all over the river. Finally, to shorten the length of the battle, which looked like being endless, I had to wade in quite deep in the dark to net the fish. What a fish and what a day. It seems to me that trolling in the south is a good way to start a boy on his fishing career, as it gives him a taste of the enjoyment in store for him and is not so tiring as casting, which is discouraging if the results are negative. The rest will come later quite automatically. Okay, and this is a portrait of my uncle as a boy, which hung in the Ruxton family home in Cheltenham for many years. I think that's in Loretto school uniform. And this is 9 Grosvenor Crescent in Edinburgh, where Ian Lester MacDonald was born on the 6th of April, 1923, at about 8 p.m. The terrace is still there, and that's from Google Street View. This is page 1 of the handwritten memorial by Alexander MacDonald, which I transcribed and made into this book. And this is from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission Cemetery at Rheinberg in Germany, where he rests in peace. The stone of remembrance is in the foreground with the cross of sacrifice in the background. The words "their name liveth for evermore" on the stone are by Rudyard Kipling. All the headstones are in the same style, regardless of rank, and the burials are as close as possible to where the soldiers fell. That's the general principles of the CWGC. A German friend, a school friend, took that photo quite recently. Very kind of him to go there and do that for me. I have been there once in the 1980s, and I'm planning to go there again next year for the 80th anniversary. Okay, so this is the headstone with inscription "Remembered with love and pride," which I think his parents chose. Okay, so now the contents of the book: preface, which I wrote, and then the rest is, well, Ian, 1923 to 1945. Those parts are all by my grandfather. And then there are some appendices which I've added for clarification and further research. So here is the preface, my preface. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945, claimed over 60 million lives, which was about 3% of the world's population in 1940. The suffering of humanity was intense. Total deaths in combat alone are estimated at between 21 and 25 million. This account is a deeply personal one of a death in action which directly affected my family. It is one which I cannot read without tears coming to my eyes, grief at the tragic waste of life and at being deprived of the opportunity to meet my uncle. And yet this is only one young man and one family among so many. Ian Lester MacDonald was a man who received high praise for his dedication to duty and courage. I have created this small book in his memory. He took part in Operation Veritable, the Canadian-British advance into Germany from the Netherlands, 8th of February to 10th of March, 1945. Well, some people have the date slightly differently, but Operation Veritable tends to have been ignored by historians until recently in favor of the earlier Operation Market Garden, which was a failure. Naturally, glorious and spectacular failures and the reasons for them attract more interest from movie makers, historians, and military strategists who seek to learn from their mistakes. Veritable was the left side of a pincer movement, the right side being the American Operation Grenade, which was delayed by German defenses along the river Ruhr, R-U-R, Dutch R-O-E-R, and French R-O-U-R. This river should not be confused with the German rivers Ruhr or Ruhr. So the Ruhr, which we know, the famous river is R-U-H-R, and there's another one, R-O-H-R. Operation Veritable presented various challenges, not the least of which was that it was very hard fighting against a foe who, albeit weakened from full strength, was for the first time in the war defending his home soil. The battlefront was narrow, some 8 kilometers, and the weather was poor with mud from rain and the winter thaw slowing the advance of tanks, mechanized vehicles, and infantry. The northern Canadian flank was flooded deliberately by the enemy. The center was the awkward-to-traverse Reichswald forest, part of what the Allies called the Siegfried Line, known as the Westwall by the Germans, and there was urban fighting at Kleve and Goch. The Steintor, a medieval gate in Goch, was saved from demolition by a British officer, Major Ronald E. Balfour, 1904 to 1945, one of the so-called monuments men and a former history lecturer at Cambridge University, that's my university, who persuaded commanders on the spot to clear a road round it rather than blow it up. And thanks to his intervention, it survives to this day. Alas, he didn't survive very much longer after he managed to save the gate. But it is a kind of memorial to him, I would suggest, in a sense. There was also fighting at many farmhouses, some of which were concealed pillboxes. This was the case at the Thomashof Robbenhof farm south of Goch. That might be two farms, actually, where my uncle and several members of his platoon number 18, D Company, 5th Battalion Black Watch, 51st Highland Division, met their end. He is buried at plot 12E20 in the Commonwealth War Graves Commissioned CWGC Cemetery in Rheinberg, Germany, which is about 30 minutes by car southeast of Goch. All of the Canadians who took part in Operation Veritable were buried at Groesbeek Cemetery in the Netherlands by order of their commander, General Krera. At Isselstein, which is about 50 minutes by car from Rheinberg, there is a huge German war cemetery, the only one in the Netherlands, with the graves of over 31,000 men. War is a scourge of mankind which brings death and suffering to the people of all nations and their families, both victors and vanquished. Tragically, it has recently returned to the continent of Europe. President Zelensky announced a few days ago that Ukraine's casualties since the start of the war on February 24, 2022, now amount to more than 31,000 killed in action. As he said, each one is mourned. Ian Ruxton, Professor of English, Kyushu Institute of Technology, which we normally call Q-Tech, Kee-tah-kew-shoo, Japan, 2nd of March 2024. Okay, so next, just on one page, lest we forget. Yeah, we should not forget. We can't forget. The individuals or the bombs, the atomic bombs, whatever. We can't forget them. We must not forget them. That was my motivation in producing this book. Ian, 1923 to 1945, March 1945. And here's my footnote. This document, a kind of pibroch in words, was written by Alexander MacDonald and transcribed with footnotes added by Ian C. Ruxton, his firstborn grandson, from words handwritten on DPG and Company, Deloitte Blender Griffiths and Company, lined paper. My grandfather, who was awarded the CBE in the New Year's Honours List 1943 for services to the British community in Chile, see second supplement to the London Gazette, 1st of January 1943, number 35841, page 16, was a partner in that accounting firm in Santiago. His wife, Dorothy Lester MacDonald, née Northcroft, was usually called Susan. She was also awarded an MBE for services to the British community in Chile. See supplement to the London Gazette, 4th of June 1934, number 34056, page 3567. Okay, back to the main text. Important. Deeply regret. Report from Western Europe. Lieutenant I.L. MacDonald Blackwatch killed in action 25th February 1945. The Army Council expressed sympathy. Letter follows. Under-Secretary of State for War. And there is my footnote about the Under-Secretary of State for War. His name was Henry Page Croft. 1st Baron Croft, CMG, 1881 to 1947, was appointed Under-Secretary of State for War by Winston Churchill in 1940 and held the post until July 1945. So my grandfather continues. There was a finality about this laconic telegram which closed the door. I was stupefied and stunned. This was the grim reality of war with a vengeance for our little family. Ian, I had seen close friends fall by my side in the last war and had been deeply affected. During the interwar period, the passing of good friends had moved me, but this was different. My life could never be the same again without him. When he went overseas in June 1944, shortly after the invasion started, I was terrified that something might happen to him. I lived in dread all the time when I knew he was in the fighting. In the past 2 weeks, I had been very worried because I knew from my wife Susan's telegrams that he had gone overseas again. For about a week, the BBC had been full of the magnificent work of the 51st Highland Division, and the Black Watch had been mentioned specifically. I knew, or rather felt so strongly that it amounted to knowing, that Ian was in it. When I answered the telephone at 10:30 p.m. on Thursday, the 1st of March, and a voice said that the cable company was speaking, I knew it was bad news. So I have notes about the handwritten pages. I'm not going to bother too much with those. A faint hope that it might not be the worst was rudely shattered when that voice in halting English read me the telegram. Halting English because the native language of that person would probably be Spanish, being in Santiago. 30 minutes later, it was delivered to me. The agony of that night is something which I can never forget. It was as if I had been struck down, felled by a crushing blow from which I would never rise again. My first clear thoughts were that Susan was on the high seas and would know nothing about this tragedy. I must go and meet her boat in Buenos Aires, Argentina. My first instinct was to be alone in my grief, but after a while this was replaced by an overwhelming need to talk to close friends. I had been talking over the telephone to Estella Bush shortly before the cable company rang up. Margin note by author, omit names question. Well, he hasn't done. I decided to call her, and somehow or other I blurted out the news. She and Booksy were already in bed, but they got up and came to me. She let Sandy McDougall know, and he also got up and came along. So Sandy McDougall was Group Captain A. McDougall. He was appointed air attaché at the British Embassy, Santiago, on 27th of November 1944. From the Air Force list, April 1945, 260 to 289. Since Susan had gone home, and particularly when Margaret was away on holiday and I was alone, I had seen a lot of him, that's Sandy McDougall, and we had become good friends. To me, he represented this war, and he had seen the reality of it. I felt he was a sort of link between Ian and me, and helped me to be more in touch with Ian's life. I told them I must go to Buenos Aires, and they took over the arrangements as far as they could. After a time, I went to bed, but there could be no sleep. Go to Buenos Aires. He had to go to Buenos Aires to meet his wife, Susan, who was coming over by steamer. Throughout that long, endless night, with that fateful telegram lying on the table, I paced the room in an agony of despair with blurred pictures so vivid of Ian dying on the battlefield and of Susan in a blacked-out ship on the high seas. It seemed so cruel that Ian, so full of life and promise, with an overwhelming desire to live, should die. There did not seem to be any logic in the margin, reason, justice, in so many magnificent young lives being taken, while so many useless, helpless people were left to go on living. The best were being taken. I must confess that my belief in God, my faith in him, was sorely shaken that night. I had always believed in the divine purpose guiding everything. In the last war, 1914 to 18, I used to call myself a fatalist, which was another way of saying that if you were going to get it, you would get it. If your name was on a shell or a bullet, it was no good worrying about it or thinking you could do anything to avoid it. It would happen sooner or later. This attitude of mind was in many instances, margin in many cases, a considerable help to a fighting man in enabling him to carry on his job. I still had the same feeling about things as far as Ian was concerned, and as time went on and he was kept training in England, I hoped that maybe he was destined to come through. When he returned from Normandy in August 1944 for further training on his transfer from artillery to infantry, it looked as if the war in Europe might be over shortly and he might escape. I clutched at any straw of hope, however faint, but of course there was still Japan to deal with. And now, to think he should be killed in his first action after his return within 11 days seemed so cruel that my faith was completely destroyed. There was no God. There could be no God to allow this sort of thing to go on in the world. What possible divine purpose could there be in allowing a few unscrupulous politicians, call them Nazis or fascists or anything you like, to wreck everything there was decent in life and plunge the world into a holocaust of death and destruction? The use of the word Holocaust, fraught with irony here, isn't it? As I paced the floor, I was imbued with a spirit of revolt against God, against everybody and everything. The war was over for Ian, and life was over for Susan and for me. I thought during that night of the plans we had made for Ian's future, of the castles we had built in the air, which had been so suddenly and utterly demolished. We used to write to him about his future career, and Susan talked to him a lot about it. I always felt it was a great thing, whatever one's inner dreads might be, to devise plans for the future as if it were a foregone conclusion that he was coming through. Ian's attitude, like that of all soldiers who know that their life is not worth a day's purchase, was that he did not see any point in thinking about the future until the war was finished. He was somewhat impatient of such planning, which he felt was a waste of time under the circumstances. How right he was! One cannot but regret a little that his short time on earth was perhaps wasted, even to a small extent, by discussions over his future career, finance, and such matters to which we are apt to attach undue importance at a time when life and death, freedom, the right to live, the alleviation of human suffering, and the like are the only things that do matter. The one plan that Ian had in his limited horizon was to return to Chile as soon as the war was over, if only for a few months' holiday. I also dreamt a lot about that. I had a plan to take a quick trip home, that's to Britain, when Ian was to be demobilized, and to bring him back to Chile with me. I used to see the two of us returning together and being met by Susan and Margaret. Margaret, his daughter, my mother. I used to think of a party I would want to throw to celebrate Ian's return, and to reintroduce him to his and our friends, and how proud I should be of my soldier son. I used to think about a fishing holiday he and I would take together in the south of Chile, when he would use that beautiful new Hardy Teviot rod. It's a cane rod made by Hardy Brothers of Alnwick, Northumberland, which has been kept wrapped up in cellophane, waiting for him. I used to think of him going out to the Grange School and his astonishment at seeing that magnificent building as compared with the house in Avenida Pedro de Valdivia, where the Grange School operated in his time. So the Grange School, I have a note about it here, was founded by John Andrew Stewart Jackson, 1898 to 1958, an Anglo-Chilean born in Valparaiso, educated at Cheltenham College and Jesus College, Cambridge University. It was modelled on Cheltenham College, which was my high school, and Cambridge was my university, so I feel some connection with him. The school was officially opened in 1928. And then there's a note about the house in Avenida Pedro de Valdivia. The house was called Villa Angela. See, well done, what's that, 80? I can't remember 80 in Spanish. What is it? Tanto, I don't remember. Años del Grange, Santiago, Origo Ediciones 2009, for a history in Spanish of the Grange School. Oh, well. I'm a bit rusty on Spanish, hoping to get better when I go to Peru and Chile. Continuing, I used to think of his return to Chile in so many other directions, and my mind's eye was full of scenes and pictures which gave me great pleasure to contemplate. But now we had all that. That is what Ian himself would have said, and the future looked so grim and black. There did not seem to be anything worth living for now. Then, in the morning, Margaret was in my room, sobbing her little heart out with grief for a gallant brother whom she scarcely remembered, whom she knew from photographs and descriptions only, but of whom she was very proud. What a comfort she was to me then, and has been ever since. I saw very clearly that her sweet young life must be preserved, and that our small family life must be rebuilt around her. That undoubtedly was what Ian would have wished. On the Sunday morning, 3rd of March, I attended Holy Communion at 8:30, and Margaret came with me to morning service at 10:30. How I suffered at those services, especially the latter, but I had to go. I was asked if I would like a special hymn, and chose Onward Christian Soldiers, but was unable to sing a word, nor could I sing a single word of God Save the King at the end of the service. The day or two after I received the news were taken up with hurried plans to go over to Buenos Aires and meet Susan, and with seeing the many friends who so kindly wished to express their sympathy, an ordeal which was very trying for me. Panagra would not find a seat in a plane for Margaret, and I was most anxious to take her with me, Fortunately, it so happened that Air Attaché at the British Embassy, Sandy McDougall, was going over in the British Embassy plane to Buenos Aires with Kerbison, his assistant, and Elias, his mechanic, on the 8th of March, and he very kindly offered to take Margaret and me also. So at a very early hour on that day, we left Cerrillos. It was still dark, and started climbing up to the Cordillera. So some notes here to explain. Pan American Grace Airways, better known as Panagra, was founded in 1929. Its network stretched from Panama to Santiago, Chile, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. Los Cerrillos was the main aviation facility of Santiago, Chile until 1967, closed in 2006. Cordillera is a Spanish word meaning mountain range. Here it is the range of the Andes. Okay, when we crossed over the top of the Cordillera, we were flying at 16,000 feet, and the sun was just coming up on the Argentine side. It had just hit the peak of Aconcagua, and I shall never forget the grey snow-clad mountains and slopes, and standing up majestically among them, Aconcagua bathed in sunshine. What a magnificent sight for a writer to describe or an artist to paint. The trip was uneventful after we crossed the hump, except that Margaret, poor child, had to sit on the floor to make room for an Argentine Air Force officer who had to escort us from Mendoza to Buenos Aires on account of some stupid red tape. Margaret took a very dim view of that young man and would have enjoyed having him jettisoned. However, after a very pleasant trip from every other point of view, we arrived at the El Palomar military aerodrome in Buenos Aires about 3:30 p.m. Okay, so some footnotes here. Aconcagua is the highest mountain outside of Asia at 6,961 meters. The summit is 15 kilometers from the international border with Chile. It is one of the 7 summits, the highest mountains of each of the 7 continents. The others are usually considered to be Mounts Denali, Vinson, Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Puncak Jaya, and Everest in the Messner version. I admit I've not heard of some of those mountains. And the other footnote is about El Palomar, which is still a military airport 18 kilometers west of Buenos Aires. An interesting feature of the trip for me was that in those days of passports and travel restrictions, I had gone from Chile to the Argentine without being asked for any credentials and without having my baggage examined, either leaving Chile or entering the Argentine. Officially, I had neither left Chile nor arrived in the Argentine. In fact, as far as the Argentine authorities were concerned, I did not exist. Margaret and I put up at the Continental Hotel and thought that Susan's ship would be arriving any day. We had no idea what ship she was on, nor when she would arrive. During the next week, 3 ships arrived, but she was not on any of them. Finally, a telegram arrived from my brother, Charlie, from Freetown, which told me what I wanted to know. And after speaking to the Blue Star Line officials, I learned that Susan would not arrive until Easter, so we had another 2 weeks to wait. Margaret was having a rather bad time with litre poisoning, and I had to take her to the Little Sisters. Okay, so here's some Little Sisters of Mary every day for treatment. Footnotes. The Continental Hotel is in downtown Buenos Aires. It was built in 1927, now called 725 Continental Hotel. It is at Avenida, what's that? A PTE, I don't know. Roque Sáenz Peña, 725. Charlie MacDonald, younger brother of the author, was an engineer. He had the unenviable task of telling Susan of the death of her son. And litre, poisoning. Lithrea caustica, Spanish litre, is a species of, I have to go to flowering plants in the soapberry family. This plant occurs in central Chile. It is a well-known allergenic and can cause a rash of the skin, the effects of which vary greatly from person to person. So my mother had litre poisoning, and she was having to go to the Little Sisters of Mary every day for treatment in Buenos Aires. I decided to return to Chile and put in a week's work, and Margaret stayed with the Maloneys, who were very kind to us during our visit. Eventually, on Good Friday, 30th of March, Susan arrived. Owing to more red tape, I was not allowed within a mile of the docks and had to wait for Susan at the hotel. About 5 p.m. she turned up, and I shall never forget my feelings when I saw her step out of the taxi. Dressed in a very smart black costume with a gold black watch badge on the lapel, a present from Ian, she looked so well, so brave, and I have never been so proud of her. To me, she exemplified British motherhood, one of the main reasons, if not the strongest reason, why we as a nation have pulled through this war, the greatest test to which any nation has ever been put in the history of the world. She was broken-hearted but proud of a gallant boy and living in his memory. For the rest of that evening and right through the night, she told me about Ian and her trip. There was so much to tell me, and I was hungry for first-hand news of him from her. It was a comfort to hear about him and to talk about him. We stayed in Buenos Aires for a week, and Susan's attention was diverted somewhat to Margaret, who had to get the better of litre poisoning and needed clothes. So there was plenty to do and think about. On Friday, the 6th of April, Ian's 22nd birthday, we flew over to Chile by Panagra plane and were met by Estella Bush. The next week was a horrible ordeal for Susan when her many friends called on her. It was so very hard for her, and once or twice she was at breaking point, but her courage did not fail. I have always loved Susan, and there never could be anyone else in my affections. Throughout 23 years of married life, we had a lot of ups and downs, but had always loved each other. Often, far too often, I was a trial to her, and sometimes she irritated me beyond measure. I do not believe it possible for a man and woman to live happily together with never a cross word. Under such circumstances, one of them must be a yes man or a yes woman, a condition which can only mean a complete lack of character. In our case, there was plenty of character on both sides, and I think a great deal of genuine understanding. I often wish I had those 23 years to live over again to make up for my many shortcomings. The ups and downs were many, but principally the birth of Ian in 1923, the death of Mary Elizabeth Florence at the age of 8 months in 1925, Ian's illness in 1927, the birth of Margaret in 1932, Susan's MBE in 1934. He left it blank, but it was 1934. Ian's winning the Intermediate Honour Cup in 1933, my illnesses in 1930 and 1939, my CBE on the 1st of January 1943, Margaret's musical triumphs, and finally the awful tragedy of 1945. Never during those 23 years have I admired and loved Susan more than I do today. Her courage under this terrible ordeal is something out of the ordinary which has surprised me. As long as I live, I shall always thank God for the decision which sent Susan to England in September 1944 to see Ian, and I shall always regret that I was unable to go also. Those 4 final months of Ian's life were filled with the companionship and love of his mother and are her most treasured memory. In a way, they made the blow almost harder to endure in the first instance, but as time went on, they meant a great deal. June 1945. And now, over 10 weeks have passed. VE, Victory in Europe Day, has been celebrated, and the pain is still there, sometimes more acute than ever. VE Day was, and could only be for us, a sad mixture of grief that Ian was not there to celebrate it and would never return, and restrained joy that our great country had been delivered from this dreadful ordeal and had survived to take its rightful place as ever in the world and in the preservation of the cause of freedom. But that day will always stand out in my memory, and in Susan's also, on account of the King's broadcast speech, which I have given in Appendix II below, in full. What a message for the bereaved. It was as if he had spoken to us. We had sought comfort in so many ways without avail, and as the days passed, felt less and less inclined to take part in anything. But after listening to the King speak, we could not but feel that Ian's sacrifice did mean a great deal, and that we were letting him down if we did not try for the rest of our lives to do something, however humble, for our fellow men. We must be up and doing, and not give way to our grief. I am sure that is what Ian would have wanted me to do. During those 10 weeks since his death, Ian's short life has come back to me in retrospect, and I have seen him at different ages and in different places. I remember the evening when he was born, about 8 o'clock, on the 6th of April, 1923, in 9 Grosvenor Crescent, Edinburgh, in the parish of St Andrews. I've already shown you a photograph of the building. We named him Ian Lester MacDonald, and with all that background, there could be no doubt whatsoever about his nationality. When he was on the way in Peru, we had been so anxious to have him born on British soil, and we certainly had achieved our object. How proud we were that our firstborn was a son, and how little did we imagine that he would reach manhood just in time for another war. Such a suggestion was unthinkable. Yes. All our hopes were centered on him, in him. And for the next 21 years, we gave him everything it was in our power to give. He would carry on the family name, and we would do everything possible to prepare him to become a worthy citizen of our great country. Those were our thoughts. Margin, top left of page, baptized in Trinity Church, Ayr, on Trinity Sunday, 1923. When we returned to Peru late in 1923 and went up to live in Chosica, Ian was beginning to sit up and take notice. He was not a beautiful child. I have realized that fact many times since, but at that time I would not have allowed anyone to say so without getting up in arms. But at least he was a healthy-looking youngster. I remember how Nan, the bull terrier, used to lie beside his pen in the garden for hours on end and never leave him. When the nurse took him out in the pram and anyone approached to look at the baby, Nan would place herself between the stranger and the pram. Chosica is an inland district of the Lima province in Peru. Later, when we went down to live in Miraflores, Ian made the acquaintance of Tita Bush, who was 3 months his senior, and there is a delightful photograph of the two of them sitting on the grass fighting over an orange, a battle of wills. One of the things Ian looked forward to after the war was the renewal of his acquaintanceship with Tita, whom he last saw in 1937. Tita would assuredly have liked to see Ian again, but she will require to content herself now with his photograph and whatever memories she retains of him. The next year or two, as far as Ian was concerned, provided the usual uneventful period when he cut teeth, learned to walk, learned to talk, and had his full share of childish ailments. With parental pride, we watched his progress and noted the different stages in a record with photographs. But at the age of 4, he developed whooping cough for the second time quite badly, and this illness had far-reaching consequences. Dr. McCormack found that he had a leaky valve in the heart and that he was missing the odd beat, what is also called a murmur, and told me that his only chance of getting over it and becoming a fit man who could take his place in the world was 4 to 6 months of complete rest. Miraflores is a residential district south of downtown Lima. That was right. Complete rest. Even then, he said that the chances were that he would never be able to play games actively and would probably have to take it easy for the rest of his life. So for 6 months, Ian spent his time either in bed being entertained or going out in a pram. At the age of 4, he did not take kindly to this treatment, as can be readily understood, but it was carried out strictly to the letter. How right the doctor was in his treatment, so hard to impose. I have often thought in recent years of that small boy of 4 years old with a weak heart, who grew into a tough Loreto schoolboy and later a fine, hardy soldier. In his first battle course in the gunners, he got a Q, which means distinction. When he was in the Black Watch, he went through at least 2 more battle courses, and I believe he never dropped out, although as a rule the numbers thinned out every day as so many men could not take it. He was able to carry out his duties 100%, as an artillery subaltern first and an infantry subaltern later, and in this war you had to be fit to do that. At the Grange School, Chile, and at Loreto School, Musselburgh, in Scotland, he always took part in the games and never shirked. It was hard to believe that this big, handsome, tough young Black Watch officer, who looked so splendid in his kilt, was that small boy with the weak heart. In the year 1927, it was decided that we should leave Peru and go to Chile after leaving England in the following year, and in August 1927, Susan took Ian home ahead, chiefly with the idea of having him vetted there and to give him the benefit of the change of climate. Doctors at home fully endorsed Dr. McCormack's treatment, and Ian made good progress. Some features of that holiday in 1928 stand out in my memory. The little house at Deepdean, Dorking, the garden behind where Ian rode around on his fairy cycle, Edith, the nurse, old Tom, the car, and so on. That glorious trip we made by car in June to St. Margaret's, Cornwall, with Aunt Flo and Uncle Percy. It was the most perfect of summer's days, and I can remember how we all enjoyed it. The particular feature was our last stop for tea, when we had Devonshire cream and buns. We were blessed with particularly good weather during that holiday, and enjoyed ourselves. Afterwards, we went from there by car to, and here's the ferry cycle. I found a photograph of one. Afterwards, we went from there by car to London Links, Fifeshire, where the Durlacks were on holiday. I can remember the early morning bathing parties and how cold the sea was. There was a particular trip by car to St Andrews where we met John Ross and his wife. My family were there with us, and George Young turned up for one weekend. Maurice Durlack, who was my godfather, by the way, and I decided to have a day's fishing in Loch Leven, and what a day it was. It rained heavily practically all day, and the fishing was extremely bad. We had two bottles of whiskey with us to keep the cold out, and the two gillies and Maurice and I did full justice to them. The final result of the day was 5 trout, averaging £1 each, and the total cost was £5. A pound of fish per pound, in other words. Quite expensive, eh? An outstanding feature of that day was high tea in the Kinross Hotel, including an unforgettable plate of ham and eggs. After London Links, we went on by car to Thurso. We were indefatigable travellers. I well remember our arrival there one night. Yeah, Maurice Durlack was one of the editor's godfathers. He lived in Edinburgh and was a writer to the Signet, which is a solicitor. I well remember our arrival in Thurso one night at the end of August, rather later than we had intended and all somewhat tired. During our holiday in Cornwall, Uncle Percy was very amused at my descriptions of life in the extreme north of Scotland in my mother's country. I quoted this classic story of a conversation up there between 3 local worthies, which went as follows. Wheel, wheel, 3 minutes interval. Boy, boy, 5 minutes interval. Man, man. And so on, with everyone perfectly content. When we were travelling by car, and there was a lull in the conversation, one of the 3 men, Uncle Percy, Ian, and yours truly, would say, wheel, wheel. One of the others would say, boy, boy, and the third would chip in with, man, man. When we sat down to late supper on our arrival in Thurso, Uncle Danny was talking to me about something and finished up by saying, boy, boy. You can imagine my embarrassment and my uncle's great astonishment when young Ian chipped in immediately with, man, man, 5 years old. Lovely. My strongest recollection of those 10 days in Thurso was getting up at 6 a.m. in accordance with time-honoured custom and bathing with my uncle off the rocks in the Pentland Firth. Cold was not a fitting word to describe it. There was no word in the dictionary. It was something frightful. I simply shut my eyes and flopped in off the rocks, swam around a bit and clambered back again as soon as I thought I decently could. I must confess that one did feel grand afterwards, and what a breakfast it induced. I remember Susan's great difficulty in understanding some of my relatives, particularly those who lived in the vicinity of John O'Groat's house. Uncle Chimmy, I think that's Jimmy, was quite unintelligible to her. However, we got through 10 days without putting up any major blanks, embarrassments, and then set off for London by 2 stages. I shall never forget our drive from Thurso to Glasgow on a most perfect day when the heather was at its very best. That part of the road between Inverness and Perth through the Highlands was incredibly beautiful. Finally, we landed up in London again, and at the end of October 1928, we set sail for Chile. Where did Ian fit into this picture of our holiday? Well, he was with us all the time, a small boy of 5, and he took his small part in everything as far as he could. Every picture one sees in one's mind's eye of that holiday contains Ian, a happy youngster with the whole world ahead of him. July 1945. Another month has passed, and if anything, the wound is deeper. The letters from his commanding officer and company commander on the field have arrived and tell us how bravely Ian died. We did not have to be told that. We knew that, however much he hated it, he would do his duty. But it is gratifying to read it from his superior officers who write of him with the highest praise. The CO says that what makes it all the harder is that although they have been in heavy fighting, their casualties have been slight. That makes it still harder for us. One feels that, apart from our very close friends, who knew Ian and can appreciate in some measure what we are suffering, or those who have had the same experience, the general mass of acquaintances have expressed their sympathy either verbally or in writing, and now feel that we must be getting over it as we seem to be carrying on with our lives in a more or less normal way. It is just an incident, a tragedy, if you like, which has come and gone like a ship passing in the night. But for us, there is no slackening of the pains. The following lines, which appeared in the Times recently, express it very well. I saw 10 million die, and all the land laid desolate. The trees stand up to heaven. Like spars of sinking ships, the stubborn grass curling in agony about the fields. And yet I know that all would be again. The trees stand up to heaven like bannered spears, the slow green flame of grass kindle the fields. But one among the millions was my son. Death caught him. Who will live for me the 20 years, the 20 centuries that still remain? Footnote about this poem I'll deal with a bit later. I, who did not see Ian again after 1937 and know him as a man only from his photographs and Susan's descriptions of him, see him everywhere and all the time. What must it be for Susan, who saw so much of him during the last 4 months of his life? It is said that time is a wonderful healer, but so far I feel that time can only make us realize more and more how much we have missed. The poem is headed War, and the initials RNK appear below it at the bottom of page 7 of the Times of the 9th of May, 1945, with thanks to Judith Rowbottom for this reference. The bishop says, the only help we can have is from the Holy Spirit. It must be wonderful to get that comfort, and I can only assume that my faith is not strong enough yet for that, as I am still floundering in a sea of doubt and grasping for a helping hand. And this is the poem War in the Times of 9th of May 1945, with thanks to somebody, Adam Dean, whom I don't know. He emailed me in January this year, having read this book, perhaps online. Chile. And so to Chile, where Ian's life from 1929 to 1936 is irrevocably bound up with the Grange School. He started there and went right through to the common entrance examinations, which he actually sat in Chile. He was very small for his years always. Like myself, he only started growing at 16 and finished up with a height of 5 feet 4 inches, and this was a great hardship to him in games. But he never shirked and had plenty of guts. His best sports were swimming and hockey, and I remember so well his going off the second board in the school diving competition to win an extra point for his colour side. How proud I was of him then, and then that other day when he stood up and took his medicine in the school boxing competition. On another occasion, he ran second in the cross-country race, which was pretty good for a small boy with an alleged dicky heart. His inseparable companions at school were John Hardy and Johnny Sparks. John Hardy is the only one of the three still alive, and lucky at that. And I shall never forget the day they organised a hockey side and challenged the Prince of Wales Country Club girls. The three of them played in the three inside positions in the forward line and were the life and soul of the team, finally beating the girls 2-1. Prince of Wales Country Club is, I think, quite close to the Grange School. It's a British club. Scholastically, Ian always did pretty well and was among the first each year. In 1933, he won the Intermediate Honour Cup, awarded for all-round showing in work and games, and we were intensely proud of that achievement. As I write, I am looking at the replica of the cup we gave him for himself, and it will always be one of our most treasured possessions. Susan brought it back from England at his wish. One other incident of his life at the Grange stands out. That was the day when he came back from school and announced with great pride that he had been caned by Mr. Jackson. Apparently about a dozen of those small boys were up before the head and were given their choice of a caning or lines. John Hardy and Ian chose the caning. Apart from the last year when he was a boarder so as to be broken in for Loreto, Ian was a day boy, and I used to take him down to the school in Pedro de Valdivia by car on my way to the office until he was old enough to go by bike. So my grandfather was driving to Deloitte's office. One morning in the year 1930, just as we were leaving the house, at that time we lived in Avenida Lota, some workmen turned up in the open space in front with a colossal stone, spades, etc., and started digging. I was just as curious as Ian and had to ask what it was all about. When I got into the car, Ian asked, "What are they doing, Daddy?" I told him that in the afternoon, President Ibanez was coming along to lay the foundation stone of the new Santiago College. We had just recently acquired some poultry, and Ian was all intrigued over the laying of eggs, which rather mystified him. He was very thoughtful and said nothing for several minutes. Finally, he looked at me and said, "How can any man lay a great big stone like that?" I never see President Ibanez without thinking of the prodigious feat he performed that day. It's my grandfather's humor. General Carlos Ibanez del Campo, 1877 to 1960, was president of Chile twice, the first occasion being from 1927 to 1931. So much for his life at the Grange School, and now for the highlights of his life at home. The first notable event was on the 18th of December 1929, when Jean and Norman Chambers, Susan, Ian, and I set off in the Chambers Ford car at 5 a.m. for Pucón, a distance of about 1,000 kilometers over the most shocking roads. It was quite an adventure, in fact, more of an adventure than we realized then. Before we were well out of Santiago, it started to rain, and the long and the short of it was that it took us 4 days to reach Pucón after being pulled out of various streams by oxen. At one point, we were crossing a stream of unknown depth and came to a standstill in the middle. Before we realized what was happening, the car started to subside in the mud, and the water commenced to come into the car until it looked as if we should be sitting in it before long. The car was a closed one, and I suppose the whole situation was somewhat alarming to a small boy of 6. Anyway, I still recall how agitated Ian was, but it was not very long before the oxen arrived and pulled us over to the opposite bank, where we held up for a couple of hours, getting the water out of the engine. Pucón, by the way, is a Chilean city in the province of Cotin, Araucania region, 100 kilometers to the southeast of Temuco and 780 kilometers south of Santiago. It is located by Lake Villarrica and the volcano of the same name, and I intend to visit Pucón in September. I've got my flight booked from Santiago to Temuco, I think it is. Later, we had to put the car on a train from one station to another as a bridge had been washed away. Anyway, we finally reached Pucón and had some good fishing there. Whenever possible, I like to take Ian out fishing with me, and I well remember taking him down to camp with Norman Chambers and Doc Stansby on the banks of the Chequen River, or Chequen maybe, in the summer of 1933. That was a wonderful and unforgettable holiday, and we had lots of fun one way or another. Ian was 9 years old, and it was a great experience for him. He learned to ride a horse and caught a fine 1-pound rainbow trout, casting from the bank to my intense satisfaction. I remember one day he and I had arranged to ride over to a farm about 10 kilometers away to spend the day while the others went off for the day to fish the Laja River. Rio de la Laja has its source in Laguna del Laja in the Andes, and is sorry, this footnote continues, important tributary of the Bio River. Okay. So the others went off for the day to fish the Laja. Ian had sat on a horse's back before then, but that was about all. Well, we started off at a walk and everything was fine until I suggested cantering. Ian said firmly that he liked walking and had no intention of cantering, whereupon I told him that under those conditions, we would not even reach the farm by lunchtime and had better wash out the whole expedition. Ian saw the point, and I gave him a few ideas about cantering. By the time we reached the farm, he was getting along fine and was thrilled. On the way home, the canter developed into a gallop, and I finally had to call him to order to have a race. That day started Ian off on a horse, and by the time he left Chile, he rode very well. In his last year in Chile, he had jumping lessons, and it was grand to see the ease and grace with which he took the hurdles on a white jumper called Princess. He had good hands and managed a horse without difficulty. Peter Pan, for instance, was a bit of a devil and sometimes ran away with people, but Ian mastered him completely, and he would do anything he wanted. For his 10th birthday, I gave him a pony called Dick, a small piebald with no vices, which could be relied upon to behave decently. Before very long, Ian had Dick under complete control and was complaining about his laziness. One winter's day, Ward, that's probably Noel G. Ward, a colleague of my grandfather and partner at Deloitte, Plender, Griffiths and Company, as you can see from the footnote. Anyway, Ward came to lunch and asked Ian how often he had fallen off his horse. Ian said not at all, whereupon Ward said that until a horseman had come off twice, he was no horseman. This impressed Ian a great deal, and there was a look of determination on his face when he set out in the afternoon to ride. He came back for tea covered with mud and proud of the fact that he had come off twice. I have often wondered what he did to the unfortunate Dick to produce such a result, as that pony seemed really incapable of working up sufficient enthusiasm to throw anybody. Yeah, there's quite a complicated note here. Noel G. Ward, a colleague of my grandfather and a partner at Deloitte Plender Griffiths and Company. My grandfather is listed as a partner from 1925 to 1948 in Sir Russell Kettle's Deloitte and Company. Other partners were John Dixon, Thomas White, Thomas Berry, and Alexander Roger. The west coast of South America had offices in Chile. Santiago opened 1921, Valparaiso 1925, and Peru, Lima 1925. From 1948, separate accounting firms were established in Peru and Chile. After 1948, my grandfather worked at Industrias Eléctricas y Musicales Odeon, S.A., a record company label company, later part of EMI, in Santiago, which was his last place of employment, according to the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. An email from them. Okay, carrying on. In February 1934, we had a month's holiday in George Reed's house in Tejas Verdes, then called La Boca. And well do I remember the wonderful early morning rides I had with Ian along the beach to San Antonio. He and I rode a lot together, particularly in the early mornings when he had school holidays, and it gave me the utmost pleasure to see him ride so well and with such obvious enjoyment. The third member of the early morning riding team was Jock, a really fine dog. He would follow anywhere and handled yapping pie dogs in the most masterly fashion. If we came near a shack with several big dogs where Jock knew he was outweighed, he would leave the road and make a long detour, joining us farther along. After Jock was poisoned, we missed him a lot in the mornings. Oh dear, what happened to poor old Jock? Later on, we were joined sometimes by a Scotch terrier by the name of Kee-tah-kew-shoo. Santonio city is the capital of the Santonio province in Valparaiso region. It is the hub of the fishing area between Rocas de Santo Domingo and Cartagena. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi is a short story in the Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. So Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, Scotch terrier named Rikki-Tikki-Tavi or Tavi, but he was no good on the open road and only came along when we stayed within the confines of the country club. In March 1936, a few months before Ian left for Loreto, he and I had a farewell fishing trip in the south of Chile. We went first to Villarica and had several days on the river Tolten. I had given Ian a rod for Christmas and had the idea that it would be a good thing for his fishing education to give him the experience of catching and handling fish before going out on to casting from the bank, which is apt to try a small boy's patience and discourage him. So we trolled the Tolten, and on our first day, Ian got a 4.5 pound brown trout and a 3.5 pound rainbow trout. How thrilled he was, and what a kick his dad got out of it. I remember the 4.5 pound brown was taking rather a long time to bring in, and Ian was getting tired. He suggested that I should finish off the job, but when I said that the fish could, and there's a note about the Tolten River rising at Villarica, close to the city, and after flowing for about 123 kilometers, it reaches the Pacific Ocean near Punta Niue, where it is about 500 meters wide. Okay, so he suggested I should finish off the job, but when I said that the fish could only be called his if he brought it in unaided, he set his teeth and stuck it out. The 3.5 pound rainbow gave him a grand run for his money just at dusk, and how we both enjoyed it. After 5 glorious days at Villarica, we went off to Antuco and stayed at a very primitive hotel there, $18 bed and breakfast. There were no windows, merely newspapers, but the beds were clean, chiefly because it was said that bugs, etc., could not live at that altitude. Anyway, Ian and I spent the whole day in the open air, bathed in the river, and always arrived at the hotel physically tired and ready to sleep. We brought a rickety old Ford car with us from Los Angeles, $50 a day plus petrol and the chauffeur's living expenses, and he took us all over the countryside, even up to a short distance from the Antuco volcano. So here's a note about Antuco, a Chilean commune and town in Biobío province, Biobío region. The commune had only about 4,000 inhabitants in 2002. It is almost due north of Villarica and 348 kilometers from there by the Via Panamericana Sur, Ruta Cinco, which has tolls. Okay. Antuco volcano is a stratovolcano near Sierra Veluda and on the shore of Laguna del Laja. It last erupted in 1869 and was first climbed in 1829 by German botanist, zoologist, and explorer Eduard Friedrich Peppich, 1798 to 1868. We had some excellent fishing in the Laja, took a lot of photographs, and generally enjoyed ourselves. I have the most pleasant recollection of that fishing holiday together. Ian and I had a lot in common. The same things appealed to us. We had a similar sense of humour, and he was a fine companion for me. I used to get a lot of fun out of playing golf with him and teaching him the first essentials, but he could only play golf during the winter school holidays, so that opportunities were few and far between. As regard the more delicate pursuits, I spent 2 or 3 years trying to teach Ian and young John Hardy the piano. They both showed some interest at first and made progress, but later on I had to drop it as they simply would not practice. While Ian was at Loreto, he got keen on the piano again and started taking lessons, with what success I never really knew. I was similar with the clarinet, I just wouldn't practice. I have already mentioned the holiday in February 1944 in Tejas Verdes. First of all, Billy Lee came down and stayed with Ian, and later on he was joined by Johnny Sparks. It was at that time that Stella and Tita turned up from Lima and came down to Tejas Verdes to spend a week with us. I shall never forget Tita, Johnny Sparks, and Ian. What fun they had. They spent most of their time on the mate, or in a boat on the river, and had the most marvellous way of disappearing when the baby, Margaret, was brought out to the garden to be looked after. My mother. In the evenings, the three of them ran a show for our entertainment and produced their various parlour tricks. It seems incredible to think that those two boys have both gone, two such fine and promising youngsters in every way. What a tragic waste. Well, that's about all there is to say about Chile as far as Ian is concerned. There is no doubt he loved Chile and had a grand time in those 8 years. It is little wonder that he wanted to come back after the war. The next episode in this short story is our leave in England in 1937. Susan had gone home with Margaret and Ian in August 1936. Mate is a traditional South American caffeine-rich infused tea drink. It is consumed in South America and also Syria, the largest importer in the world. So Susan had gone home with Margaret and Ian in August 1936, and I followed in April 1937, getting to England just in time for the coronation. And actually, I have video, which I've put on YouTube, taken by my grandfather, of the parade down the Mall for the coronation and the state coaches. Quite impressive. This holiday was a big disappointment to me, as I caught cold within a few days of arriving home and had a miserable time with asthma throughout the 5 months I was there. In the midsummer break, we took Ian and John Hardy up to St. Fillan's on Loch Earn for a long weekend. We attended the church service at Loreto one Sunday morning, and what a fine sight it was to see all those boys in the kilt. St. Fillan's is a village in the Central Highlands of Scotland in the district of Perth and Kinross. It lies at the eastern end of Loch Earn, and there's a photograph of St. Fillan's. When one looks back upon that service, it is hard to realise that all or nearly all of those boys were destined to fight in a world war in a few years, and that many of them have passed over to the other side. Later on, in the month of August, we went to Sea Houses in Northumberland, where we had taken a house. The water was pretty cold, but Ian seemed to enjoy the bathing. His holiday, however, was somewhat upset when he suddenly developed appendicitis pains and had to go easy. So they didn't actually operate straight away, I see. So spelt here with a capital H, Sea Houses is a large village on the Northumberland coast, about 20 kilometres north of Alnwick. It is within the Northumberland coast area of outstanding natural beauty. Must go to Northumberland sometime. When we returned to London at the end of the month, we went to see a specialist immediately, with the result that Ian had his appendix out in September at the Middlesex Hospital. He hated the idea of an operation and made a bit of a fuss. Nothing would persuade him that there was really little to worry about. At the end of September, we saw him off to Edinburgh at Euston Station, he on his way to Loreto, and we leaving the next day for Chile via New York. My last recollection of Ian is a painful one. A small boy with his eyes filled with tears, saying goodbye. Little did I realize what that goodbye was to mean for us. I often wonder, in the light of subsequent events, if we had known what the future held in store for us, would we have sent Ian to Loreto? We did what we felt was best for the boy, and if it was wrong, in that it may have deprived him and us of a few years of happiness together, I should be eternally sorry. We should, in fact, we must have faith and believe that everything we did for Ian was guided by the divine hand, and that his allotted span on earth was a short one. But if that were the case, why were we not given those last few years of happiness on earth with him? Why? It is so difficult to see things clearly. As far as we know, his life at Loreto, 1936 to 1941, was happy. In any event, he loved his old school, that we do know. And surely that is the answer. He had his ups and downs at Loreto and showed a lot of pluck in overcoming the difficulties which handicapped him. There was that unfortunate physical weakness, which must have been very embarrassing for him, and was undoubtedly the main reason why he was rather quiet and shy by nature. This handicapped him at games, particularly rugger, which is very important at Loreto. He was never much good at cricket, and the game he liked best was hockey, at which he was quite successful. He got into the first 11, and after he left school, played for Aberdeen University. Scholastically, he did well, passing his school certificate quite young, and also the first half of his intermediate CA examination. Chartered Accountant examination, I think that is. The choice of a career was entirely his and not directly influenced by me in any way, but had he come through the war, I doubt very much if he would have followed it. I remember when he wrote out to us on one occasion, his letters were few and far between, and he was a thoroughly bad correspondent, to say that he did not think he had the brains to be a chartered accountant and thought he had better be a diplomat. I told that to one or two members of the British Embassy in Santiago, who took rather a dim view of it. It must be tough to go through life entirely devoid of a sense of humour. Indeed so. At the age of 18, July 1941, Ian left Loreto and immediately joined the army, having been selected for a special course as an artillery officer. After 2 months in the ranks, he was sent to Aberdeen University for 6 months on a course, and later joined his OCTU, Officer Cadet Training Unit, at Llandrindod Wells. Here he did extremely well, passing out as first cadet and parade commander in October 1942. He evidently showed ability and leadership of a high order. Llandrindod Wells, Trinity Parish, as correctly spelled, is a town and community in Powys within the historic boundaries of Radnorshire in Wales. So he evidently showed ability and leadership of a high order, and we were naturally very proud of him. Ian was a late starter, and as Dr. Greenlees told us, only really began to develop fully in his final year at Loreto. So Dr. Greenlees, who was he? Here's my footnote about him. Dr. James Robertson Campbell Greenlees, 1878 to 1951, was a Scottish rugby union footballer, physician and teacher. He played for Cambridge University, Kelvinside Academicals and Scotland. Led Scotland to Triple Crown Championship and Calcutta Cup win in 1903. President Scottish Rugby Union, 1913 to 14. Physician, 1906 to 1926. Served in World War I in the Royal Army Medical Corps. Mentioned 4 times in dispatches for great gallantry at Neuve-Chapelle, etc. DSO 1915 and Bar 1917. Chevalier Légion d'Honneur 1918. Headmaster of Loreto School 1926 to 1945. We will see one of his letters later. Okay. After his OCTU, Ian's OCTU, he was in different parts of England training for active service and went over a few days after D-Day with his battery. He saw fighting at Caen in Normandy, hard fighting, and then just when the whole front began to move and became fluid and interesting, his troop was disbanded and he was sent home to be transferred to infantry. According to Ian, his troop commander did not get on with the battery commander, and that is why his troop was chosen. Whatever the explanation was, it was a bitter blow to Ian. He had given of his very best in the gunners and had done extremely well. His heart was in it, and it was little wonder that he took not at all kindly to the transfer to infantry. He asked to be sent to the Seaforth Highlanders or the Black Watch, and was posted to the latter. My grandfather had been in the Seaforths in World War I. Then followed months of further training, battle courses, etc., during which he had the good fortune to have Susan somewhere not far away, always ready to listen to his troubles and to give him the advice and encouragement he so much required. They had many good times together, and he finally said goodbye to her on Saturday, the 11th of February 1945, to go back to that hell on the continent of Europe. Susan says he was strangely quiet on that day of parting, and it would seem that he had a presentiment that he would not come back. He flew over to Germany on the 14th of February, having been delayed by bad weather, and must have gone into action almost immediately. After 6 days of fighting, during which the Black Watch did well, and Ian gave a good account of himself, He was ordered to make a night attack on a strongpoint on the Siegfried Line at Goch, Germany, on Sunday, 25th of February. Just as he was reaching his objective at the head of his men, he and his section leader were killed by a burst of machine gun fire. Spandau machine gun. His company commander reports that Ian had done his work so well that the strongpoint was taken easily. Just an incident in this bloody war, but it meant the breaking of two hearts. With that incident, Ian's short career on Earth came to an end. He had done nobody any harm and was a fine, clean, decent boy, I believe. I believe if he had lived, he would have led a useful life and played his part as a good citizen. Maybe with the world as it is today, he is better off. The ways of the Almighty are exceeding strange. And if one believes in anything at all, one must accept Ian's early death as part of the divine plan. Say what you like, it is hard to believe that. July 1946. And now another year has passed. Time goes so quickly, I did not realize it was so long. And I have not put pen to paper to complete this poor attempt to record Ian's short career and to analyze my feelings. I do not know why I am doing this, other than I have the urge to do it. Just one of those things one does without knowing why. For posterity, I would suggest. It has been such a hard year for my poor Susan. After all she had suffered, it did not seem right that she should be stricken by that dreaded disease, the very name of which one hates to mention. I suspect it was cancer. I do not know how she was given the strength to endure that second operation. Life is so cruel. Now, thank God, she is better and looks well, and I firmly believe we have seen the end of that trouble. She is obviously nervous of a recurrence. Who would not be? But I am sure it has been arrested in time. Anyway, I pray hard that she will never be troubled again. Shortly after our return from Buenos Aires, we realized that we had to get out of the old house with all its associations. And now we are in our own little house, not much of a place, but our own, even if not yet paid for. Sometimes I wish I had more money, enough to be able to retire and not worry, and yet I know that money is not everything by a long way. This I find curious because he was a partner in an accounting firm. Was it not very well paid? Interesting. The things that matter most in life are health and happiness in the home. Yes, indeed. How do I feel about everything now? If ye break faith with us who died, we shall not sleep though poppies grow on Flanders fields. This is a quotation from the poem In Flanders Fields by Canadian military doctor and artillery commander Major John McCrae, written during the Second Battle of Ypres in May 1915. He wrote it while mourning the death of his friend Lieutenant Alexis Helmer, who was killed at the age of 22 by a shell on 2nd of May 1915. The poem was first published in Punch magazine on the 8th of November 1915. Have I broken faith with Ian? I often feel that he is around, helping me to carry on. Most of all, I feel that he wants me to devote the rest of my poor life to looking after Susan and Margaret in the first instance and to doing as much good as I can for my fellow men. His inspiration is with me to help me along the road. My physical contact with him is the wristwatch I wear, which he was wearing when he was killed. Among the few belongings returned from the battlefield was the watch, which we had sent him from Chile in the year 1942. Susan's contact is the beautiful gold black watch brooch, which he gave her, and which he always wears. But there is also the spiritual contact, and I often feel his presence near me. Margaret is a wonderful consolation to us both. She is such a sweet girl, so full of life, so intelligent, and so devoted to us and her home. She may be untidy and has her faults like everybody else, but her good qualities far exceed her shortcomings. Sorry, this is about my mother, so my one great desire now is to see that her life is a happy one, as far as it lies within my power to do so. It is hard to know what is the best course to follow for her benefit. There is a lot of life in Chile which is unsuitable for a young girl, and yet, with conditions at home as they are, one cannot think of breaking away and settling there. Possibly it is better not to try to make plans. After all, we made so many plans for Ian which were shot away, and I think it is better to take things as they come. Ian's estate has now been settled and amounted to nearly £1,900, more than we thought. He was so interested in Santo Domingo and so keen about going there for a holiday after the war that we have decided to put money into a house there. It has now been started, and we hope it will be ready by the end of the year. I shall always regard it as our personal memorial for Ian. Santo Domingo St. Dominic is a small coastal city and commune in San Antonio province, Valparaiso region. The population was 7,418 in the 2002 national census. I am not the man I was. My work is not what it was, and sometimes I feel afraid of the future. I suppose 2 wars and Ian's death have been too much for me, apart from other lesser troubles. When I analyze my situation, I feel that I've been a failure in life. What have I achieved? In the material sense, little or nothing. In the cultural and spiritual fields, nothing. I beg to disagree there. I am often bad-tempered, petty, and unreasonable. The best thing I ever did was to marry Susan. She has been such a help to me, bracing me up when I feel depressed and encouraging me to greater efforts. I hope that I shall be given the health and strength to go on working successfully for a few years more, so that she and Margaret will enjoy freedom from want in the future. That's one of the 4 freedoms included in Franklin Roosevelt's speech of 6th of January 1941. Yeah, before Pearl Harbor. Okay. At the beginning of this year, I had a week of glorious fishing in the River Tolton at Villarica. As I went down that river, my thoughts reverted constantly to the year 1936, when Ian and I had fished the same stretches together. What a beautiful river that is, how peaceful. That was the sort of thing Ian loved, and how he hated war. And when I think of what is happening in the world today, of the difficulties with Russia, so what's new? We have our own difficulties with Russia now, I'm afraid. Of all the troubles, it makes me wonder if the sacrifice of so many magnificent young lives was to any purpose. When I think of the atomic bomb, I shudder. What is going to be the end of it all? They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Yes, we will always remember Ian with great pride, even if our hearts are broken. And this is from Robert Lawrence Binyon's poem For the Fallen, composed in 1914 in honor of the casualties of the British Expeditionary Force at the Battle of Mons and the First Battle of Marne. It was first published in the Times in September 1914, and these lines are read every year at Remembrance Sunday services. So that is the end of what my grandfather wrote, and the rest is just appendices which I've added. First of all, letters about Ian MacDonald, the one from his headmaster, Dr. Greenlees. I don't think I shall read all these through. If you want to pause, you can read them for yourself. You can also, I've uploaded this as a PDF to the repository of Kyushu Institute of Technology, so you can actually download all of this there. Or, of course, you could buy the book if you were so inclined from Amazon or Lulu.com. Yeah, this is a letter from Dr. Greenlees to Ian. A letter from Ian's superior to his guardian, Major Farquhar Young, on Black Watch headed paper. This is after his death. I only took over this company a few days before Ian died, but in those few days I learned what a grand officer and leader he was. I was truly sorry to lose him. As you know, it is always the best officers who go. It's misspelled Ian with an extra I, but I don't think we'll worry about that. And there's more detail about the action in which he died. It's quite a lot about another company commander. His men thought him a grand officer, and many were the hard words and deeds poured on the Boche when they found out that he was dead, Boche being the word for Germans. I cannot hope to replace him, as officers of his caliber are few and far between in the 6th year of war. He is buried with the other officer and the men who died with him in that action, in a quiet little orchard near to the scene of their gallant fight. The territory is firmly in our hands, and his grave will be carefully tended until it is removed to an official war cemetery in the area. And so it was. I hope that someday when this rotten business is over, I will meet you or his people and be able to tell you personally how gallantly Ian died. And this is from the minister of the Church of Scotland who administered the burial. And well, there's a lot of detail there. We deeply regret Ian's unfortunate passing, but I feel sure you will be proud of a son who gave his life in the ranks of the men of our British infantry, every one of whom is worth many decorations. We shall see him anon. I pray the consolation of the Great Father for you. If I can help, please do not hesitate to write. I send this to you because I presume from Ian's words that Mrs. MacDonald has left for home. She had already. This was a letter to Mr. MacDonald. So writing to Chile, I suppose. Yeah. Here's King George's speech, King George VI's speech on VE Day. Actually, that might be worth reading. May 8th, 1945. Today we give thanks to Almighty God for a great deliverance. Speaking from our empire's oldest capital city, war-battered, but never for one moment daunted or dismayed, speaking from London, I ask you to join with me in that act of thanksgiving. Germany, the enemy who drove all Europe into war, has been finally overcome. In the Far East, we have yet to deal with the Japanese, a determined and cruel foe. To this we shall turn with the utmost resolve and with all our resources. But at this hour, when the dreadful shadow of war has passed from our hearths and homes in these islands, we may at last make one pause for thanksgiving, and then turn our thoughts to the tasks all over the world which peace in Europe brings with it. Let us remember those who will not come back, their constancy and courage in battle, their sacrifice and endurance in the face of a merciless enemy. Let us remember the men in all the services and the women in all the services who have laid down their lives. We have come to the end of our tribulation, and they are not with us at the moment of our rejoicing. Then let us salute in proud gratitude the great host of the living who have brought us to victory. I cannot praise them to the measure of each one's service, for in a total war, the efforts of all rise to the same noble height, and all are devoted to the common purpose. Armed or unarmed, men and women, you have fought and striven and endured to your utmost. No one knows that better than I do. And as your king, I thank with a full heart those who bore arms so valiantly on land and sea or in the air, and all civilians who, shouldering their many burdens, have carried them unflinchingly without complaint. With those memories in our minds, let us think what it was that has upheld us through nearly 6 years of suffering and peril. The knowledge that everything was at stake, our freedom, our independence, our very existence as a people, but the knowledge also that in defending ourselves, we were defending the liberties of the whole world, that our cause was the cause not of this nation only, not of this empire and commonwealth only, but of every land where freedom is cherished and law and liberty go hand in hand. In the darkest hours, we knew that the enslaved and isolated peoples of Europe looked to us. Their hopes were our hopes. Their confidence confirmed our faith. We knew that if we failed, the last remaining barrier against a worldwide tyranny would have fallen in ruins. But we did not fail. We kept faith with ourselves and with one another. We kept faith and unity with our great allies. That faith, that unity have carried us to victory through dangers which at times seemed overwhelming. So let us resolve to bring to the tasks which lie ahead the same high confidence in our mission. Much hard work awaits us both in the restoration of our own country after the ravages of war and in helping to restore peace and sanity to a shattered world. This comes upon us at a time when we have all given of our best. For 5 long years and more, heart and brain, nerve and muscle have been directed upon the overthrow of Nazi tyranny. Now we turn, fortified by success, to deal with our last remaining foe. The Queen and I know the ordeals which you have endured throughout the Commonwealth and Empire. We are proud to have shared some of these ordeals with you, and we know also that we together shall all face the future with stern resolve and prove that our reserves of willpower and vitality are inexhaustible. There is great comfort in the thought that the years of darkness and danger in which the children of our country have grown up are over, and please God forever. We shall have failed, and the blood of our dearest will have flowed in vain if the victory which they died to win does not lead to a lasting peace founded on justice and goodwill. To that, then, let us turn our thoughts on this day of just triumph and proud sorrow, and then take up our work again, resolved as a people to do nothing unworthy of those who died for us, and to make the world such a world as they would have desired for their children and for ours. For their children and for ours. This is the task to which now honour binds us. In the hour of danger, we humbly committed our cause into the hand of God, and he has been our strength and shield. Let us thank him for his mercies, and in this hour of victory, commit ourselves and our new task to the guidance of that same strong hand. Yeah. And then there's an entry in the Loreto School Roll of Honor. And there are mentions in a book called The Spirit of Angus, Angus being the battalion in which my uncle served. It was called the Angus Battalion, volunteers, I think, or not full-time professionals anyway. This is the entry in the Black Watch Roll of Honor of all the people who died in the same place and time. And then this is about my grandfather. Appendix 5, a brief biography of Alexander MacDonald, CBE, 1894 to 1954. Alexander MacDonald was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1894 and educated at Hutchison's Boys' Grammar School in Glasgow. He served in the 6th Battalion, the Seaforth Highlanders, during the First World War and was invalided out, having been wounded and fallen victim to poisoned gas, which led to chronic asthma. The treatment in those days was to seek a dry climate in which to live. From 1919 onwards, he worked on the west coast of South America, firstly in Lima, Peru, for 8 years, and subsequently in Santiago, Chile, where the climate was much kinder to his health. He led an active business life as senior partner of the then firm of Deloitte, Plender, Griffiths & Company for many years, and then as managing director of Odeon, a subsidiary company of electrical and musical industries, EMI, in Santiago, a job he much enjoyed because of his great love of music. He was a much respected member of the British community and served it in many capacities, not least as chairman of the war effort, for which he received a CBE in 1943. 2 years later, his son was killed in action in Germany, the son who had been his fishing companion as a small boy in the 1930s. Chile had much to offer a man of his talents in the 1930s and 40s. He was able to use his mathematical skills and practical experience as a golfer to design golf courses, a hobby which interested him almost as much as fishing. The first course was at Pucón, followed by the Los Leones course in Santiago in collaboration with Agustin Edwards, the author of the foreword of Trout in Chilean Rivers. That's the manuscript which has since been published by me. And by the way, the Edwards family of Chile is of Welsh origin. They became financially and politically influential in the 19th century and still own its most influential newspaper chain, El Mercurio, SAP. Probably Agustin Edwards Budge, 1899 to 1957, is mentioned here. Problem is, there are a few Agustin Edwards, and you only know who is being referred to by the last name, in this case, Budge, perhaps. He, that's my grandfather, Alexander MacDonald, expended a great deal of time and effort on the course at Santo Domingo, designing it and supervising the planting. The course opened in 1946 and is now a beautiful and renowned championship course, a great legacy indeed, for which many Chilean golfers are grateful. Not surprisingly, in 1947, he was appointed president of the Asociación de Golf de Chile. The last course he designed was Los Incas in Lima, which opened in 1949, though there were others on the drawing board at the time of his premature death in 1954 at the age of 59. It was in Chile, a fisherman's paradise, that he was able to enjoy to the full the great sport of fly fishing in some of the most beautiful and unspoiled countryside in the world. He was persuaded by friends to write an account of his experiences in this field when he had a few months of enforced idleness in 1938, owing to illness. He had an enviable knowledge of many of the best fishing rivers and applied painstaking attention to detail to the excellent maps of the areas he knew. Trout in Chilean rivers was written in a more peaceful age before the advent of intensive commercial air travel, sophisticated hotels, mobile phones, and all our modern aids. Even color photography was in its infancy. It was intended as a guide to fly fishermen visiting Chile, and the author's wish to share his enthusiasm for the sport with others is obvious. He revised the book in 1952, and his widow returned to England, bringing the manuscript and accompanying photographs and maps to hand on to their daughter and family. And finally, I've managed to publish it. Okay. Alexander MacDonald had an abiding love for his native Scotland and for his adopted country, Chile, and its people, among whom he had many friends. They regarded him as the epitome of a gentleman, which he was. Moreover, he was a gentleman with a delightful sense of humour and a great record of public service. He and his contemporaries did much to foster Anglo-Chilean relations in their day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is the end of my reading of this book. I hope you enjoyed it. I see I've gone over 90 minutes, which is pretty long for me. But anyway, thank you very much if you've persevered this far. Quite a long time to listen. Okay, thank you and goodbye now. Bye.